Good morning, everybody. I am Sardenberg, Director of Economy and Prudential Regulation of Febraban. I'd like to welcome all of you to our 10th edition of our Congress to prevent money laundering and financing of terrorism. This is the 10th edition and the first edition totally online. And I'm very pleased to say that we have more than 2,300 enrollments in this Congress. It's a record. We will start our Congress with our opening panel, and I'm pleased to inform the President of Febraban, Sidney, and Dr. Maurício Costa Moura, Director of Institutional Relationship and Citizenship of the Central Bank of Brazil. Isaac has a bachelor degree in law, and in the financial system, Isaac started his career in 1990 in Banco do Brasil and worked for 18 years in the central bank, holding several positions, and the last one was the Director of Institutional Relationship and Citizenship of the Central Bank of Brazil. Isaac joined Febraban in May 2019 as Vice President, and since March 2020 he is the President of Febraban. Dr. Maurício Moura is the Director of Institutional Relationship and Citizenship of Central Bank. He joined the Central Bank in 2003 in the investigation area, and he is the Director since 2017. And currently is in this area of institutional relationship and conduct supervision. Maurício was the Chief of Office of the organization financial sector and President of the Central Bank. He works on financial education, conduct of financial institutions, of clients, and combat of money laundering and financing of terrorism, communication with the citizen. So, he is the right person to help us in the opening of our Congress. I will give the floor to Isaac. He will open the Congress, and then we will hear Dr. Maurício Moura, and I think we'll have time for some questions. So, wishing you a nice Congress, thanking the presence of you, I give the floor to Dr. Isaac. Thank you, Rubens. It's a great pleasure to represent in one more event Febraban. And I'd like to greet my dear friend, Director Maurício, holder of a relevant post in the Central Bank, the Director of Institutional Relationship and Citizenship, which works closely to the combat to money laundering. So Dr. Maurício is always helping us and to share his vision and special experience in the opening of this 10th AML CFT, a very well-known acronym. So for 10 years, Febraban periodically holds this Congress very successfully. That gives us the idea that it's worth investing on this subject. I also want to welcome those who are participating in this Congress as our Director of Risk Regulation and the Chief Economist of Febraban, Rubens, said, we have a record of enrollment with more than 2,300 people. This motivates us because prevention to money laundering is an important subject and a dear subject to Febraban and the associated banks, especially to the country. That's why we were insisting in have this Congress remotely, and this allowed the access to more people. We cannot and we won't accept that the organized crime establishes itself and uses the financial sector to the criminal practices. We know that no sector of economy is immune to them, but those who tries to make the bank sector a channel to money laundering is not welcome. Just the opposite will be target of our communications to the public authorities. What did we see during this pandemic period? We saw the exponential growth of criminal actions, whether through banking frauds or spurious schemes to shift public funds and medical equipment to combat COVID-19. Many of operations deployed by the federal police and the federal and state public prosecution office, because what we saw was the cruelty of criminals that even in a period of serious crisis, health crisis, shift the resources that were allocated to save lives. You know, crime has no end, we know that, but the more robust and convergent are the controls from banks over actions to prevent money laundering, more protected will be the financial sector and the population. The principle that guides our activity of money laundering prevention is this: the convergence of purposes. That's why fundamental data that I'd like to highlight is that the AML CFT areas of banks do not compete among themselves. They are not competitors. We all know in the bank sector know that only cooperation and integration among participants, regulators and regulated will make us beat the criminals. We have huge challenges in these areas. We are talking about a sector that has big dimensions, that daily carries operations involving the lives of all the population. Just to give you an idea, and here are data from 2019 to give you a precisely idea. Last year, 78.9 billion of bank transactions involving 155 million of current accounts, both individuals and corporations. Our service network has more than 21,000 branches, a capillarity of 176,000 ATMs, and this involves also the relationship with more than 340,000 bank correspondents. This gives you an idea of the challenge we have not to allow the financial system to become a channel for criminal actions. The commitment of banks to money laundering prevention is noted in numbers. The banks are the main responsible for the communications of suspicious operations to COAF. Also, last year, we made 119,000 communications of suspicious operations especially to COAF. In addition to these suspicious operations, we also communicate frequently the cash operations of amounts equal or superior to 50,000 reais. These communications reached 2,900,000 last year, according to the data of COAF. With the support of these communications, whether suspicious or cash operations, COAF produced 60,272 financial intelligence reports. When we look at other data, we see that these reports reached about 255,000 individuals or corporations, and this consolidates a considerable number of communications of financial operations. Now, numbers of this year, 2020, data until September, we had a substantial growth in the amount of communications of about 40% on suspicious communications and 10% of increase of cash operations. This year, we had 160,000 suspicious operations communications and 3,200,000 operations related to cash operations. What does it mean? This is the reflex of a very diligent work of the banks. During the pandemics, we respond to the call of COAF and GAFI to reinforce the monitoring and to strengthen the surveillance in our measures to combat illicit occurrences, to mitigate the risks of financial crimes related to COVID-19. But the actions of banks in money laundering prevention is not strict to the communications made to COAF. We have an active participation of the bank sector, talking with authorities, debating all the time and making proposals that aim to the regulatory improvement and adoption of best practice to prevent money laundering. We also developed courses with trained professionals, especially those working directly in the areas related to AML-CFT. We have a commission inside Febraban formed by professional experts. We participate in international forums, and all of this gives us the dimension of our engagement in money laundering combat. In 2013, 7 years ago, Febraban created its self-regulation, regardless of the regulation of the central bank, just aiming to provide or to strengthen our controls, to standardize and structure operational procedures, aligning them with principles, both international and the principles determined by the central bank. Our objective was to adequate the operational policies to prevent money laundering. Today, we are reviewing this self-regulation of Febraban, and this will be done according to the new regulatory framework. I'd like to highlight that Febraban is one of the co-founders with the active participation of ENCLA, the National Strategy to Combat Corruption and Money Laundering. It's an organism that promotes important changes in this country. Today, the Ministry of Justice will talk about several initiatives within ENCLA. This Congress is one of the ways of contribute with the presentation of subjects of interest to the sector. The subject of this 10th Congress was thought so we could think about the evolution of money laundering prevention in Brazil. Crime evolved, crime became more sophisticated over the years, but also we had a huge learning and evolution both in the regulated sector and the control agencies. The financial system, the bank system also learned how to deal with the criminals of financial illicits. This made us to improve our control systems, our policies on Know Your Client, the use of tools, modern tools of analysis, and also the constant training of our staff. Aligned with all of this, we can ensure that we had a fundamental gain of this learning. That means the maturation in our relationships among regulators, regulated agencies and controls. I'd like to thank Dr. Maurício and to congratulate the Central Bank for the publication of the new standards of money laundering, especially Circular 3978 and the Circular Letter 4001. It's a modern regulation with a risk-based approach aligned with the most advanced we have in this field, including other jurisdictions. These standards brought very important changes and impact in the financial sector related to money laundering, and these standards will provide more, will make the system more robust with more assertiveness. I'd like to say that Febraban, as a representative of the banking sector, is gathering with a group of experts and technicians to align the understanding of the sector with these new standards. As president of Febraban, I want to renew the commitment of the entire banking sector and collaborate with the regulators and authorities for the constant search of the regulatory improvement and the adoption of the best practice to combat money laundering. Finally, I'd like to say that it's an advance that these new standards I have taken into consideration the discussions we had with ENCLA and GAFI, showing the importance of these forums that is always debating the combat to money laundering. It's important to interact or to have an interaction among the areas of the banks led by the Commission of AML-CFF of Febraban. Today, during the event, we will listen about risk-based assessment, in technological innovations to serve the money laundering prevention, and banks and Febraban will be always working with the transparency, the ethical principles and democracy, participating on this work against criminal actions and illicit actions. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Isaac.
Por favor, Maurício.
Okay, Maurício, you have the floor. Firstly, I would like to greet everyone especially Isaac, Sidney, and our colleague from the Central Bank. So he is a very good friend. And also I would like to greet Rubens Sardenberg, a long-time friend, and would like to thank him for the introduction. But above all, I would like to greet those who are watching us in the 10th conference on AML-CFT. The conference is nothing without the participants. If the idea of an event is to share information among all the participants on a specific topic, and here we are discussing AML-CFT, the conference has no meaning without the participants. So I would like to greet you all, and we are trying to evolve on this topic that's so important for the country. The Febraban conference is in its 10th edition, and it's always weighted by the market with a great expectation, and is increasingly recognized of being very important for AML-CFT, both for the quality of the debates and also because it reaches this audience that is watching us, and it works as a multiplier in each one of the institutions herein represented. The importance of AML for the country cannot be minimized. Izaki mentioned fighting the organized crime. Sometimes we are too involved in operation and governance of the AML-CFT in our institutions, be they as regulators or regulated entities, and we end up forgetting or not seeing the major picture. We concentrate in the operational tree, and we don't see it as a representative of the major forest. We hear very sad news of crimes, and we forget that preventing AML and CFT within the national financial system and payment system is the greatest contribution we can have to produce a safer country for all Brazilians. The organized crime is really a wound in our country and anywhere in the world. The contribution we can give and the way we can fight these negative news that we see in the media, not fighting the news, but the origin of the news, which is the crime, leads us to this prevention of AML. And this cannot be minimized. We are all major actors to a lesser or greater degree of this fight that we wage in the country against organized crime and all types of crime. The organized crime is a web that permeates all types of crime, even the smaller crimes. If we follow them, they are within this major web that leads us to the organized crime. And we don't do anything without the proper resources. To fight AML is try to deprive the crime in all of its spheres of what is its essential food. That is to take these initiatives ahead, so we can lie down in our beds, in our pillows, and with peace of mind, knowing that we have done made a contribution during the day to fight this crime and to make the Brazilian population safer. So this is an introduction I always make when I talk about AML, not to lose sight of the view of how important we are and our institutions are. Now, talking a little bit about the history, the law 9, 16, and 13 which is the framework of AML CFT back in 1998, created the COAF and defends the system of shared responsibility between regulators and regulated entities. We know the obligations of the financial institutions that are the operating activities that move ahead of AML, where it may happen using the financial system by implementing AML procedures and controls, getting to know our clients and their operations in the various institutions so that we can analyze those who have been selected and to report to COAF, the main manager of the AML system. On our side, as regulators, talking about the central bank is to guarantee that the financial institutions should implement the AML in an effective manner that will lead to effective preventing of AML. But we are not antagonists in this process. Each one, so we have different roles, but each one on its role, we are partners in this fight against crimes in Brazil. If we are partners, not adversaries, we need to move on together to fight the criminal action. As Isaac said, the crimes become more and more sophisticated and complex, the relationship webs, and we have to move ahead, not only at the same speed, but at a greater speed, so that we can effectively fight the criminal actions. And in fact, we have moved forward together in the implementation of practical measures. If they are not heinous, they are heinous in their essence. An example, as Isaac said, is our common participation in the national strategy at ANCLA. And we have participated in it, and we have discussed several topics, and that has led us to expand the system of AML, CFT, and, for example, how to fight the cash transaction for money laundering. We have moved ahead greatly as we have seen the seizures and the evolution of the regulation on this topic. In the financial segment, and I am going to speak as a regulator, and we have to comply with the legal requirements and the determinations of the conduct oversight that has evolved in its process of monitoring and detection using sophisticated technologies such as analytics, and that have given rise communications not as in a greater number, but also with better quality and more accurate to COAF and well-grounded. As Isaac said, the fruit of this evolution is shown in the figures of the banking sector. Only in the banking sector, we have reported in 2019 119,000 communication of suspicious activities, and also concerning the use of cash in high amounts and other types of reports to COAF. So overall, we have progressed, but this advancement also shows that the laws need to make advancements. So the advancements, be it in the criminal actions or the sophistication of the financial system and the governance for AML, as well as the advancement of the international agreements and the internationally recommended procedures, has shown us the need also to move ahead with the legislation. And this brought us in 2019 the famous consultation that put in debate with society what would be a draft of what would become in 2020 the circular letter 3978, and it has produced a major echo in society, and we received many suggestions, and hundreds of them were really helpful to improve the system. The circular letter 3978 would take effect in the middle of the year, and due to the pandemic we have postponed its enforcement, and it entered into effect this month. And this circular letter has aligned our AML regulations to all the other regulations. One of the major or fundamental innovations, it has ideological principles, leaving to the authority the definition according to the risk assessment defined internally in each bank. So this circular letter has really buried any possibility of using standardized illicit action. So there is not one size fits all for all institutions. Each institution needs to find its best way to act considering the AML that it's exposed to it, to its operations or products it offers, or based on the customer base or the transactions conducted by this client. So these principles are fundamental for this principle-based nature of the regulations, and so that it can lead us to a good AML. So the first principle is that now we adopted a risk-based approach. And this approach has allowed us in the last 10 years that the prudential oversight of capital and liquidity could evolve greatly in the last 20 years. We left from a standardized oversight to one that is individual. The institutions started really putting into effect internal risk assessment, and now we have a prudential oversight that allow us to face many crises and with the soundness of the financial system. So the risk-based approach that was so good to the prudential oversight will bring the same benefit and to the AML. So we don't have ready-made formula, only through the strict analysis based on the transaction, and the transaction of the institution and its partners can lead us to a good framework of AML inside each institution, and there will not be two frameworks. And the second fundamental principle is that it's not enough for the institution to establish the risk-based assessment. It needs to assess the effectiveness of this approach. I don't know if the director Maurício is having some technical problems, but we can no longer hear him. So we are checking exactly what's going on. And I think that let's wait a few seconds so that the connection can be re-established and he can resume the floor. Maurício, we have lost you for a few seconds. Okay, now we can hear you well enough. Now going back, so both the circular letter 3978 and 4000 brought major, unfortunately we had the connection interrupted. So once again, a risk-based approach. I think I'm having some internet connection problems, but let's move on. And the second pillar, could you please address that? Well, the second major challenge of implementing this rule, identification, classification of each client of the institution based on the risk he brings and of the business, and also the business or the transaction he performs. So it's not enough the know your client. We need to get to know well your partner, your employee, your supplier. So among all of these parties, the risk-based approach can be implemented fully. And finally, we have to evaluate the effectiveness. All of this framework has to be effective and not only intended to comply with the rule. So this framework implies a change of view and procedure, and it's going to be supported of a good governance. Just to give an example, so if the central bank plays its role of the AML, and this will lead us to our internal governance. So the strategic committee that's formed by all heads of departments, so we have to define our internal strategy, AML, a technical group bringing together several areas so that we can analyze the supervision, so that we can align our external internal procedures, our specific department to really handle the AML. And the head of DICOM will be here with us in the next panel, and this will materialize the PICs concerning the prudential oversight. Also the Department of Financial Monitoring in the area of inspection that signals a typical transaction. And also we have our executive secretariat that deals with all aspects of relationship, international and national. And we are going to continue to involve internally. So, and this continue rethinking of our governance should also permeate all financial institutions. And one of the innovations of the circular letter is the demand for having a robust governance of all controls in AML, and that it can feedback, propose improvements for the deficiencies that will be corrected by the institution itself. And this will be very important for the central bank supervision. We talk so much about changes that we have the impression that we need to reinvent the wheel. We have moved ahead a lot on the regulator side and financial institution, the area of AML. We don't need to start from scratch. The analogies, we don't need to change the frame of the glasses, but rather the lenses. We have to analyze the product with a different lenses, focus on risk and know your client, and abandoning standardized approaches. So this enhancement in AML CFT will be important not only for gaining space in this fight against criminal actions, and also keep up with the market that's more and more competitive, and digital includes new technological solutions, institutions both in the financial market and in the payment area. So we cannot talk about being stationary when we talk about AML CFT when everybody around us is evolving. So our AML framework needs to evolve at a speed equal or greater than the ones surrounding us. Just finalize, I'm sure that this edition of the conference will allow the sharing of experiences that has characterized all institutions so that we can contribute towards giving a step so that all the AML CFT system in Brazil can evolve in enhancing the process and improving the economy in Brazil. And I would like to highlight and thank the participation of the regulated areas and all the associations. In this case is Febraban, and to send suggestions not only in the public consultations we have conducted and also in our continuous relationship. We always receive suggestions and information coming from the business practice, and they are very valuable so that we can have one of the most advanced standards and so that we can also have a risk-based AML amongst the most advanced in the world. So once again, I thank you for the invitation to participate in this event, and I wish you all a very fruitful day. And now I'll give the floor back to you.
Thank you, Director. Very clarifying the comments. Maurício, we still have some minutes. Is it possible, to ask you some questions just to benefit from your presence? Isaac, I give you the floor, and then please, I have a question. But Isaac, you go first. Thank you once again, Director Maurício. I'd like to highlight 2 or 3 points in your speech that really marked this opening. The director said that to prevent money laundering and financing of terrorism is the biggest contribution to have a more secure country. And we know, as you said, that the organized crime is a web that permeates all the other crimes in the country. So it is up to the regulator that sees the overall, and we need to advance in a higher velocity to combat effectively these crimes. And he also said something that is worth to remember. These crimes, they are not idiom, but they would be in their essence. This shows the importance to get together and to collaborate more and more. We still have some minutes for question, and as to the circular 3978, it brings a significant advances in the financial sector. And we know, Director, that this norm or standard didn't come overnight. There is a story for this edition. So 2 questions in one. What were the challenges that the central bank faced to publish this norm, and what would be the most sensitive points so we could pay more attention to this norm? Thank you, Isaac, for your question. I will try to be brief. As you said, it's an evolution. Things do not come out of a blue. I think that the important for the evolution of this norm was, first, the evolution of the recommendations from GAFI with the best international practices. You mentioned when you open, and I did not, but one of the big happenings will be the visit of Gafi for the fourth round of assessment as for AML. It will be a hard assessment. It's not because it is Brazil, but in all countries. And it must be strong because this will reflect our capacity to coordinate all institutions. So the Financial Task Force will be strong with us, but it is necessary. And what I would say to institutions, be prepared for this international financial task force, because the internal risk assessment, identification of customers or client, you won't have two equal risk matrix, more improved procedures for know your client, and the effectiveness of the norm. Show me that this norm, this standard, is effective nationally and within the financial institutions. Show me, and the financial central bank will ask the same question. Show me or the FATF assessor that your norm is effective. How can you show that? It is a matter of governance. And going back to your first question, one of the main drivers, what were the main drivers? One is the FATF recommendations, and the second was the evolution of the standard. It was a very rich process. We had some noise in the media because of misunderstanding in the evaluation. This change by the prescriptive norm to risk-based norm creates a misunderstanding. You are not relaxing the norm. You are just the opposite. You're making it more strict because you have a standard procedure to all institutions, and sometimes you don't have the capacity of mapping the diversity of the financial system. So this initial point of the norm was misunderstood, but then we evolved. This was the challenge to adequate the norm according to the international standards, and how to make this transition a more standardized money laundering prevention to approach more based risk. Well, we still have 1 minute to ask you a last question. Yes, we do have. So, since he touched in the essence of the standard, that is the change to a risk-based approach, and taking this in consideration, I would ask two questions. First, what is the importance of a greater synergy among regulators, considering this new approach? And the second, when we have a new regulatory framework that made more strict this policy, this know your client policy, or partner and supplier and vendor, in your point of view, what is the border or frontier of the robustness of this policy, and on the other hand, the business relationship? The fact that the approach now is based on risk, it favors the sharing of information among institutions. When you had a more standard approach, the point was to share more sensitive information. Now I see the associations representing the financial system like Febraban, they can have a central role in sharing their approaches because these are experiences in terms of governance, for instance, how was established the governance in the different institutions. And with the AML, many of them can evolve more rapidly. And sharing governance solutions doesn't mean to share sensitive data of the clients. It's to share ways of organizing what was wrong and what was right. Some institutions overcame already some problems without the need of sharing sensitive information. And know your client, your supplier, your partners, your employees is a much more internal analysis than an analysis to be shared among institutions. I'm not concerned with the competition issue of this topic because this greater knowledge that institution will develop internally will not open the door of any sharing. Thank you. Now we will thank Dr. Maurício for accepting the invite to open this 10th Congress to debate and discuss this subject that is very important for us. Thank you. We'd like to thank again Isaac, Maurício. Maurício, I was especially happy because you mentioned in your speech the need of sharing among regulators and regulated institutions. You also said sharing of information among institutions would say that in this area of AML, there is no competition among the banks. We are together in this task. This is very important. Isaac mentioned this in his opening, that it is necessary to have this cooperation among institutions. So the criminals are on one side, we are on the other side, and we need to cooperate. And also this cooperation between regulated and regulators, you see that the purpose of this Congress is the exchange of experience. So once again, I'd like to thank you very much for your availability, your participation, always enriching our events. Isaac, I'd like to thank you for this opening and thank the presence of everybody. We will have a very short break, and in 5 minutes we'll be back with the first panel, which is exactly the risk-based assessment, control, and supervision. So we are going to listen to the regulators. We'll be back in 5 minutes. So thank you, Maurício. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you.